The story of humans in the Dune universe spans thousands of years. This is emphasized by the new series Dune Prophecy, which takes place 10,000 years before the birth of Paul Atreides, according to the show. The timeline is massive, long, and complex, but fortunately the Dune Encyclopedia contains a very comprehensive timeline of the Dune universe. The encyclopedia dates the earliest civilizations of Earth, or Terra as it's called in the universe, to 19,000 to 16,500 years before Guild, which is roughly 2800 BC if we use our own calendar. The Dune Encyclopedia briefly covers the history of Earth and mentions historical terms such as Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, and Byzantium. However, since these events are so far in the future, the information is inaccurate. For example, it is written that 16,400 to 16,000 years before Guild, the Roman Empire arises and conquers the known world except for China, which resists until 14,400. However, we know this is factually incorrect since the Romans and the Chinese never interacted militarily. After that, in 15,000 BG, it is written that the imperial seat moved to Byzantium in retreat before provincial rebellions and minor jihads. This is a reference to the fall of the Roman Empire and how Constantinople became the new Rome. From 14,700 to 14,608, the period is referenced as the Great Struggle, the century without an emperor, which could be related to our own Dark Ages. Then there are references to discoveries in America that allowed Madrid to attain the status of the imperial seat, which we know refers to the Spanish Empire. Following this is the Battle of Anglo Channel and the move of the seat of empire from Madrid to London, most likely a reference to the 9 Years' War, which cemented British domination. The Golden Age of invention includes the development of radio, television, atomics, rocketry, genetics, and computers, with the first atomics demonstrated in an intra-provincial war. The seat of empire then moved to Washington. After this begins the original timeline of Dune, which is different from our own. The time period between 14,100 to 13,600 BG is called the Little Diaspora. In this period, humans begin the colonization of the solar system, and the population of Earth is eventually outnumbered by 20 to 1. In 13,402 BG, Ceres gains the imperial seat after a planetoid strikes Earth. After this, the period called the Rescue of the Treasures begins, during which travelers visit Earth and rescue significant historical relics that are spread across the known universe. The planet is reseeded with human populations and set aside as a natural park. 3 centuries later, the suspensor nullification effect is discovered by a computer, the Verifax Mark II, which is the 3-dimensional incarnation of the Holtzman effect. This discovery allows humans to travel at interstellar levels and gives birth to the period of the Empire of 10 Worlds, which, as the name suggests, refers to a time when humanity extended to 10 interstellar planetary colonies besides Ceres, and an emperor ruled them. However, during this era, communication throughout the Empire was strained, and the worlds existed in some isolation. This period is eventually succeeded by the Empire of 1,000 Worlds, which began when humanity extended to around 1,000 interstellar planetary colonies. This interstellar confederation was considered an empire in name only, as imperial power was so diffuse that it was almost non-existent. This weakened empire gave rise to a rebellion that ultimately destroyed the imperial seat of Ceres in 11,105 BG, marking the start of the Age of Pretenders. Unlike other periods, this was a short and obscure time in galactic history, lasting only 5 years according to the Dune Encyclopedia. However, the next period, the Age of 10,000 Emperors, was much longer. This long period of ancient human history is also called the Great Dark Ages. It saw the birth of Ibrahim von Holtzman, one of the greatest scientists in the Dune universe. His greatest discoveries were a series of 4 interrelated principles and forces which became known as Holtzman theory. His discovery provided the means for instant communication between worlds, which kickstarted the 2 millennia-long period known as the Wars of Reunification. This period began when Holtzman, now a cyborg, pursued by his father, sent a distress message using Holtzman waves to the 6 nearest inhabited systems, informing them about an instantaneous interstellar communication device, which his father allegedly intended to keep for himself. The systems complied, all except one, immediately. These revelations led to the widespread and rapid development of Holtzman wave generators, sparking the wars. It is not clear what their purpose or objective was. It is possible that each faction was tempted by the new opportunities presented by the new technology and sought supremacy over other systems, leading to each of the 6 factions clashing with one another. On Holtzman's second return, the wars were so ferocious that he chose to remain hidden and simply perform some repairs. The wars ended when Ladislaus the Great united humanity into a single empire of 10,000 worlds, beginning the first Golden Age, a glorious part of human history. It was during this time that Holtzman reappeared at Liesco and presented the theory for the construction of the defensive shield. However, the Golden Age was followed by the Silicon Plague, a condition first recorded in 3678 BG that affected the conductors of computers, leading to the machine death. The loss of computers brought on the Little Dark Ages. The defensive shield had attained the peak of its popularity and became more precious than ever. With its use, the social fabric was preserved, and the Dark Ages lasted only 2,000 years. With the invention of plague-resistant conductors, the use of computers returned and the second reunification began, which brought about the Second Golden Age, a glorious but obscure period in human history. During this time, perhaps humanity prospered, united under a common empire. However, around 711 BG, one of the Daldan founded Humanity First, which began tensions between the Humanity Firsters and the computer mites for the next 500 years. These tensions eventually resulted in the Butlerian Jihad, one of the most influential events in the Dune universe. This crusade against computers, thinking machines, and conscious robots lasted almost a century. After 2 generations of chaos led by the Butlerians, the god of machine logic was overthrown by the masses, and a new concept was introduced. Man may not be replaced. After 2 generations of violence, humanity took a pause. Following this, their gods and rituals were viewed in a different, perhaps even jaded light. Both were largely seen as guilty of using fear as a means of control. Hesitantly, the leaders of religions whose followers had spilled the blood of billions began meeting to exchange views. This move was encouraged by the Embryonic Spacing Guild, which was beginning to build its monopoly over all interstellar travel, and by the Bene Gesserit, who were banding together the Sorceresses. In 108 BG, Holtzman reappeared. By then, however, Holtzman was thought to be the last thinking machine and was expected to return only to be destroyed. Pilgrims had amassed in space around Liesco to witness the elimination of the final symbol of the old order of the machines. So many of them gathered, in fact, that many of their ships suffered collisions. The Jihad fleet did not try to communicate with Holtzman, but found his ship after 3 days. Viana Kellis won the lot to sacrifice herself in killing him, making his preventative measures of self-preservation ineffective. She suited up and infiltrated his ship, presumably triggering his planar field device, thereby causing a mass conversion reaction that was witnessed by the Jihad fleet. The explosion destroyed both Kellis and Holtzman. Holtzman's last discoveries were never made known. The Butlerian Jihad had a long-lasting effect and influence on humanity. By 108 BG, the Jihad itself had ended with the complete destruction of all intelligent machines that had originally been built by humans throughout the worlds. It had profound impacts on the socio-political and technological development of humanity across the new empires that emerged, including a large technological reversal of human civilization. The Butlerians who had initiated the Jihad left armies in their wake. The most dramatic and long-lasting result was the ensuing commandment from the Orange Catholic Bible, which held sway over humans against the creation of machines that bore the human mind's exact image. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind, following the destruction of man-made intelligent machines throughout the human worlds. Even the simplest computers and calculators were banned, with the penalty for building or owning such thinking machine technology being trial and immediate death. This lack of thinking technology created a severe gap in humanity's quality of life, revolving around the need for humans to perform complex logical computations and calculations. This gap led to the creation of the Mentat Order, the Bene Gesserit, and the Spacing Guild. The last major impact of the Jihad was the rise of a new system, a feudal arranged galactic order that lasted for several thousand more years under the rule of House Carino. This order, known as the Carino Empire, was comprised comprised of several new and powerful groups, including the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, Choam, the Landsraad, and the Great Houses. House Carino's acquisition of the imperial seat was thanks to the Battle of Corrin, the space battle from which the imperial House Carino took its name. It was fought on Corrin near Sigma Draconis and settled the ascendancy of the ruling house from Seleucia Secundus. After the battle, Bashar Abalurd Harkonnen was accused of cowardice by an Atreides and exiled. This event started the feud between House Harkonnen and House Atreides, which would last for almost 10,000 years. According to the Dune Encyclopedia, 2 years after the Battle of Corrin, House Atreides was founded as one of the Great Houses when Demetrius Atreides was made Baron Tantalos in reward for aiding the Carinos. 2 years later, the abilities of the spice melange to aid space travel were discovered, drastically increasing the importance of spice and the dependence of the Spacing Guild on it. 5 years before the Guild's formation, Choam, a galactic monopoly encompassing all forms of commerce across the Imperium and essentially controlling all economic affairs across the cosmos, was created. In 5 more years, Choam combined with the Lion Throne and the Spacing Guild, establishing the form of human society for the next 10,000 years. Every year after this was labeled as AG, after Guild, as opposed to BG, before Guild. Several decades after the Guild was formed, the Dune Prophecy show takes place. The show chronicles how the Bene Gesserit began pulling the intergalactic strings that eventually led to Paul's rise in Dune. The structure of the Empire is new, with the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild not as influential as they are during the movies, and House Carino has been on the throne for only several decades. 3 centuries after the Guild's formation, the Treaty of the Great Convention was brokered between the Great Houses, the Spacing Guild, and the Imperium. The underlying philosophy of the Great Convention was that human life was precious and superior to all other forms of existence. Its principal guideline was that human life was to be protected. As a result, strict rules were put in place for wars and feuds. Conley was a principal example of this, as was the War of Assassins. 50 years later, the Usha Rebellion began, which was the last significant armed resistance to the Empire. After the end of the rebellion, Saudir III designated Seleucia Secundus as a prison planet. 2 years later, Valak I began using Seleucia Secundus as a training ground for the Sardaukar, the elite military force of the Padishah Emperor. Millennia later, the Order of Mentats was founded by Gilbertus Albans, originally on the planet Septimus, and moved to Tleilax a decade later. 2 millennia later, an empire saw the first instance of the War of Assassins, when House Harkonnen feuded with House Party. This form of warfare, where rivaling great houses of the Landsraad used professional assassins against each other, became a staple. In 6600 AG, the first wild Reverend Mother was discovered after the Sayadina on Rozak discovered a plant whose ingestion unlocked the voices within. By 7193 AG, the Zensuni on Rozak bought passage to Arrakis from the Spacing Guild. By this time, all Zensuni from both Ischia and Rozak had reached Arrakis. In 8711 AG, Paulos Atreides 16 moved his whole family from the planet Galatan to the paradise world Caladan. 3 millennia later, Leto Atreides, father of Paul, was born. 16 years later, Shaddam IV became emperor. 2 decades later, the first protagonist of Dune, Paul Atreides, was born. 15 more years later, House Atreides moved to the planet Arrakis, which is the timeline of the first Dune movie and book. 3 years after moving to Arrakis, Paul regained control of Arrakis and its spice monopoly, which in turn helped him become emperor. Paul's first 12 years as emperor saw Paul's jihad. The Holy War spread throughout the known universe and pillaged thousands of planets. The jihad ended in 10,208 AG after 12 years of bloodshed. According to Muad'Dib himself and his conservative estimates, his legions caused 61 billion casualties, the sterilization of 90 planets, the demoralization of 500 additional worlds, and the eradication of 40 different religions along with their followers. 10,000 worlds were subsumed bloomed into his new empire, as lauded by his high priest Korba. By 10,209 AG, Leto II and Ganima were born. In that year, Chani died, and Paul went into the desert, which made Alia become regent. Her regency lasted a decade, and by 10,219 AG, Leto II ascended the throne and ruled for the next 3,000 years. His rule saw a couple of revolts, several deaths, and the revival of Duncan Idaho's Golem. Following Leto's dissolution and the newfound freedom of his subjects, a chain of dramatic events transpired over the next 15 centuries. The famine times were a period immediately after the death of Leto Atreides II, just before the scattering. The famine times resulted from Leto's peace, whereby all populations were planet-bound. Following Leto's death, the peoples of the Imperium fell into famine, as they had come to rely on Leto's empire for all things. These times were characterized by the cannibalism of machinery and the plundering of natural resources. An example of this was the partial deforestation of the planet Gamu and its Palingetam trees. The desperation felt by those experiencing the famine times eventually led to the explosion of humanity across the universe. This was the essence of the scattering, and part of the golden path that would save humanity from stagnation and annihilation. During the scattering, humanity left the established bounds of the old Imperium and spread out into uncharted space, creating a new and unpredictable dynamic in the universe. Billions of humans and factions fled the old Imperium into uncharted space, motivated by the opportunities created by Leto's absence and their fear of stagnation. The old Imperium, once tightly controlled, fragmented into competing factions. The Spacing Guild, Bene Gesserit, and Tleilaxu remained the dominant forces, but lost influence as new powers emerged. One of those new powers was the Honored Matres, a brutal counterpart of the Bene Gesserit who evolved in the distant reaches of space. They developed new methods of control based on extreme violence, sexual dominance, and rapid expansion. 2,500 years after the death of Leto II, the old Imperium faces challenges from the returning scattered factions. The Honored Matres begin their aggressive expansion back into the old Imperium, clashing with established factions. The Bene Gesserit, led by Mother Superior Taraza, work to counter this threat while continuing their breeding program. Duncan Idaho, a Gola repeatedly resurrected by the Tleilaxu, becomes a key figure in the Bene Gesserit's plans, and Shiana, a young girl on Arrakis, formerly Arrakis, gains the ability to control sandworms, sparking religious fervor and political intrigue. However, Arrakis, the original source of the spice melange, is destroyed by the Honored Matres. The destruction forces factions to rely on the Bene Tleilax, who possess the secret for creating synthetic spice, known as axolotl spice. The sandworms, which are critical for spice production, are relocated to Chapter House, a secret Bene Gesserit stronghold. The Bene Gesserit, under Mother Superior Odrade, prepare for a final confrontation with the Honored Matres. The Bene Gesserit secretly terraform Chapter House to serve as a new home for the sandworms and ensure spice production continues. Merbella, an Honored Matre captured by the Bene Gesserit, undergoes training and eventually becomes a bridge between the two factions. The Bene Gesserit aim to merge with the Honored Matres, creating a new unified force to combat external threats. Merbella becomes the leader of both the Bene Gesserit and the Honored Matres, forming a hybrid faction that combines the strengths of both groups. This merger aims to prepare humanity for the mysterious and powerful enemies hinted at as pursuing the Honored Matres from the scattering. The enemies from the scattering, potentially advanced machine entities or hostile alien civilizations, loom as a greater existential threat. The new Bene Gesserit Honored Matres hybrid faction begins preparing for this external conflict. And this is how the original Dune timeline by Frank Herbert ends. The seventh Dune book was supposed to be the end of the series. However, the work was never completed due to his untimely death in February 1986. Because of this, many unanswered questions remain about the series. However, I think this unfinished nature really fits the central theme of the series. The characters achieve freedom and self-determination to the point where not even the author controls them anymore. By that time, humanity had reached the furthest reaches of space, and no human could catalog all of humanity at that point.